Hello, readers of Every Word, and welcome to EveryWord365. I'm your host, Christina Munoz-Madsen. Today we're reading Acts 24 through 26. Have any of you been through a trial? Not the figurative definition, but a legal process of some kind. Maybe you're going through one right now. If so, you know how arduous, emotional, confusing, and oftentimes unfair it can be. I personally have covered many criminal trials, including that of the murderer of Ann Presley, when I was present for every minute of that trial. And I've also gone through a legal ordeal on a personal matter. So speaking from experience, it is not fun. Can any one of you relate? So today I offer up some insight from a resource that I haven't used in a while, Verse by Verse Ministry International. If you're new to this, it's another resource that I like for you to give to you so that you can dig for more information. It breaks down every verse, explains what's happening and why. The entire links are included in the podcast description, but be warned, they are very lengthy because every single verse is broken down. So here's a little bit of what I'm talking about. As we near the end of the book of Acts, today we move into the second of three sections describing Paul's years in captivity. Last week we studied the first section with Paul in Jerusalem under the control of the Roman commander for the cohort in Jerusalem. Neither review resulted in a decision concerning Paul's guilt or innocence. Imagine what these trials would be like to sit through and witness. In fact, in looking back over the events in chapters 22 through 23, it's easy to see God at work in keeping Paul in custody. An interesting perspective to think of this as a very good thing when it comes to building God's kingdom. It goes on to say that we note that Paul never makes any such offer of money. Instead, Paul seems content to remain where God has placed him, knowing he has this opportunity to preach to Felix and receive visitors. Would we pay a bribe to leave a prison in a foreign land so we could get home and continue our lives? Or would we see our circumstances as Paul did in this case? Would we patiently allow our time in prison to become a witness opportunity, understanding that God was in control and our time in such a place had been ordained for His glory? That doesn't mean we wouldn't take every opportunity to leave, but only under the right conditions. I want you to ask yourself those questions right now. Would you be able and willing to stay all for God's purpose in prison when you really were innocent? Finally, Paul testifies that his trial is merely the result of his obedience to Christ in testifying that the Messiah has come and risen. And in particular, on this day, Paul says his testimony was the result of having obtained help from God. So again, this is a breakdown of a verse-by-verse organization that is telling us what's going on in every bit of our readings. Without God's help, Paul would have already died at the hands of his enemies. But instead, he stands here to testify. Notice that relationship. Paul is alive because God has sustained his life. And his life has been sustained so that he can testify in this moment and later moments. Paul understood that his life was not his own, just as our lives are not our own. We live each day because there is something more we must testify concerning, or else the Lord would have already called us home. And again, I have the links to all of those entries. And again, they're very long. But if you like to break down bit by bit, you can go to that link or go to versebyverseministry.org where they tell you all of these different breakdowns. Now, have you ever really thought that maybe you are still walking this earth because there is something that God is calling you to do? Now, that doesn't mean you'll die the second you do it, but I do think it should make all of us question our purpose enough to want to figure it out. If you recall, I send out that spiritual gifts test. It's kind of the first step. If you don't know your purpose, if you don't know your calling, that can be super frustrating. I encourage you to continue digging in the Word, find out your own spiritual gift, and pray. Ask God through the Holy Spirit to show you your purpose, show you your reason for walking this earth. Also, did you notice that we have now read about 3 different people named Ananias? Well, that can be very confusing. So I'm including a link with some clarification on who they all are. Again, we joke about all those names being the same in the Bible. which can be a little confusing at times. So I'm trying to help you out with that. Tomorrow is the last day of Acts. Can you believe it? It has really gone by fast. Happy reading. This podcast is made possible by Travel with Friends, and today we're sharing more about their European tours. Europe is filled with heritage and culture and beautiful scenery. Italy is home to some of the world's most iconic art, architecture, and cuisine. Ireland has beautiful landscapes. Scotland is rich in heritage. England shares the origin of the Protestant/Methodist faith. From the coast to the capital, Greece is filled with amazing cuisine and abundant history. Travel with Friends and experience the best of Europe. Just give them a call at 501-379-9226, or you can email them at friends@travelwithfriends.com, or click the link in the description of this podcast and let us make your travel dreams come true. Again, there's more on Travel with Friends in the podcast description.